Welcome back to another volume of truly disturbing tales from Reddit. Today we're going to be narrating 3 new unsettling stories, taken directly from the platform. I encourage you all to sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy these terrifying personal accounts. Now, without any further delay, let's jump right in. I just heard a post earlier tonight that reminded me of this not-so-fun moment that happened last year. At the time, I, a 24-year-old female, had the entire lower/main floor unit that I lived in to myself. I used to bartend/manage a nightclub a few blocks away and would usually get home around 4 a.m. This night, I had just finished a 12-hour shift, was exhausted and hungry, so I decided to order some food. I place the order, get my joint rolled and ready for when the food arrives, put on a movie, and wait. Eventually, I hear the doorbell ring, and being alone, and it being so late at night, I waited to get the photo sent to the delivery app to verify my food was at the door, not just for the safety, but also so I wouldn't have to make small talk with the driver. 3 to 5 minutes pass, I see a photo of my food on the doorstep, and decide to get up to go get it. My bedroom has 5 large windows that gave me a full view of the path along the house, the main street in front, our garbage area, and the area right in front of our unit's door. The driver is still out there, and now he's texting me to come out and get my food. I tell him he left it in a perfect spot, and that I'll be out shortly to get it, and thanks for delivering. At this point, I'm waiting for him to go because even though weed is legal here, people can still be judgmental, and I don't want to go out in my PJs to collect my food, smoke, and see a human after working all night. He doesn't leave though. He keeps texting me to come outside, and now I can hear him talking to another male voice, although my window view obscures anyone else that might be out there. The food in the photo was right against my door, and I can see him edging it away and off to the side so I'd have to fully step out and around a small corner to collect it. I keep texting him, telling him it's in a perfect spot. I'm glad he followed the instructions, and I'll be out shortly. He starts banging on my front door now, still occasionally talking to this other male voice. My food is now further away from the door. He won't stop banging and telling me to come outside. Eventually, I tell him I set delivery as no contact, as I have COVID and don't want to get anyone sick. After I saw he'd read my message on the app, he put my food back by the door and walked out of there through the back parking lot, although initially he had come in the main entrance from the front of the house. There was something about this entire encounter that felt off. I waited about 15 minutes until I couldn't see anyone or hear anyone, and I quickly opened the door and grabbed my food. The whole ordeal lasted about an hour. My food was nice and cold, the joint was out, away for another day, and my heart was racing for the rest of the night. So, delivery man who wouldn't take the hint and go away, along with his friend, let's not ever meet. The story I'm about to tell happened to me about 7 years ago, but I still remember the fear that I felt like it was yesterday. When I was in my early 20s, I worked the night shift at a bakery making donuts. I loved that job. 3 nights of the week, I would be with my coworker, and 2 nights, I would work alone. It was the summertime, and we were having some problems with the AC, so the maintenance guy, Andy, came at night when I was on the clock to work on it. The bakery was small and crowded during the day, so it was best for him to come when it was empty. Management always did a good job to let me know when Andy would be there, so it was never a surprise. At first, he was very pleasant, and I had no issue sharing space with him as we worked. But one evening, this all changed. My one coworker was a little bit late. She said she lost track of time in the shower. So Andy piped in saying, "We should all shower together to save time," and begins laughing. It was creepy as hell. I also had stated that I lived alone, with his response being, "Good, I have you to myself then." After this night, I realized Andy wasn't the kind of guy I thought he was. I stopped speaking to him unless I had to, and before long, the AC was repaired, and I thought that I was free of him. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later. I'm working alone. It's nearly 2 a.m. I'm trying donuts when I hear all of a sudden a loud banging on the front window. Startled, I look up and see who else but Andy. He's calling my name and asking to be let in, but nobody had told me anything about him coming that night. Andy then starts pulling on the front door handles. Luckily, they're locked. I run into a corner of the bakery where he can't see me and try calling my manager with no response. The bakery phone begins to ring, and I can see the caller ID from where I'm sitting. It's Andy. He's relentlessly banging on the window and trying to pry the door open. With my fear rising, I dial 911. The cops arrive within 10 minutes and search Andy's vehicle. In the back seat, they find duct tape, a knife, and rope. They can't do anything though, quote, because he hasn't harmed me, unquote. Andy told the police he was there to fix the AC. My manager calls me back in the morning and tells me that the AC is working fine and that nobody had asked Andy to come through. Needless to say, we found a new maintenance man shortly after this, and all employees were put on high alert to be on the lookout for Andy if he ever decided to come back. Thankfully, he never did, and I haven't seen his face in the 7 years since. But every so often, I find myself wondering what would have happened, what could have happened, if those doors were open that night. I went to the University of Buffalo, fresh out of high school in the early 2000s. At that time, the online world was a bit like the Wild Wild West, which included having to do quite a bit more digging to find specific information than today's split-second Google searches. As such, it was a much easier time for colleges and universities to hide or spin campus crime statistics to make themselves look better for prospective students. Case in point, I was at orientation a month or two before my freshman year, and one of the mass presentations I had to attend was about campus safety. Bright-faced upperclassmen orientation aides enthusiastically verbally filleted the school, boasting about how North Campus was in, at the time, the safest town in the country, Amherst, New York, and that the only murder in recent history had occurred 9 years ago to an unfortunate student named Linda Yalem, who was murdered on the campus's bike path during a lone, early morning run. It was a fate that, we were assured, could be avoided by simply not hitting the bike path alone. What they conveniently didn't reveal was that A, the killer hadn't been caught, and B, Yalem wasn't his only victim. Turns out he was a serial rapist, an eventual serial killer, who had already been active in the area for at least 25 years in downtown Buffalo and on the secluded bike paths of the Buffalo suburbs. In retrospect, had this information been as readily accessible as it is now, it probably would have kept me from the most bone-chilling encounter of my life. Fast forward 3 years, I was a very depressed 20-year-old who was struggling with her sexual identity and her parents' reaction to it in a much less accepting time than now. I'd left school, and to avoid being home, shacked up with a woman who'd promised me the world, but then rejected me in favor of her ex-girlfriend on the night I moved in, and eventually turned out to be a felon who drained vulnerable would-be love interest bank accounts, though that's a very convoluted story for another time. So clearly, I was an unhappy young adult, desperate for love and a sense of belonging, sometimes to my own detriment. Despite my roommate's many unkind and hurtful gestures, I stuck with it in the naive hope that she would eventually come around and fulfill her pie-in-the-sky promises to me. On a particular July night, that hope just fell flat. I was at Roxy's Green Room, a now defunct lesbian bar and club that many wayward Buffalo lesbians, myself included, flocked to at night to feel a much-needed sense of community and to hopefully land a special someone. Since the latter just wasn't happening for me, I was still stuck on my roommate. She liked to dangle emotional carrots overhead, out of some sick joy that she got from making me hurt, but also to hang on to hope. And after a promise to hit Roxy's alone with me and talk about us, she showed up with her ex turned current and shut me out. I was wounded and upset enough to leave around 1 a.m., well before the 4 a.m. last call that I was still young and spry enough to stomach, and without a ride home like my usually wiser self would have secured. While my apartment on Delaware was walking distance from Roxy's, it was a good half-hour walk. Being as emotionally charged as I was, though, I angrily hoofed it down the Main Street sidewalk, still managing to follow the pedestrian rule of walking against traffic despite stupidly ignoring a rule I knew well from years of watching forensic shows. If you're a woman, never leave a bar at night alone, especially if you're walking. I got exactly halfway home when a dark green sedan started driving towards me. I thought nothing of it until the car slowed down near me as I walked. A lone, middle-aged man was in the car with a skin tone that I originally associated with the guy being Italian, but in retrospect, he could have easily been Puerto Rican. He had dark hair, and most importantly, almost impossibly dark eyes that seemed to hold no light of good intentions. Now, I was used to guys being pigs. I'd been catcalled by downtown construction workers when an ex-girlfriend and I shared a kiss, and I had endured all matter of wholly unwanted, graphic, and ham-fisted advances from dudes at school. Although I'd never take the stance that I was, quote, asking for it. I was young and thin, so I was dressed in a tight, red crop top with flare-legged black spandex pants. The getup was meant to turn women's heads, so I wasn't exactly surprised that I caught the attention of the wrong sex. I paid it little never mind, past mild irritation that a guy old enough to be my dad would look at me like that, as the guy drove off and turned at the next intersection behind me. My walk resumed. I put the guy out of my mind, and I continued my trek. But the peace didn't last. About 2 or 3 minutes later, I see a familiar green car coming up on me again. This time, the guy's window was down a bit, and he shouted, "Hey!" in a beckoning manner, and gestured in a way that made me wonder if he thought I was a lady of the night. Now that incensed me. Despite my recent struggles with my identity and the resulting entropy in my life, I was always a good kid. I flashed him a quick, annoyed look to inform him that despite the mildly revealing clothing, he was barking up the wrong tree for several reasons, and then I ignored him, focusing forward. He sped off again, just to turn around once more. At that point, it was clear that the dude was casing me like a cat burglar cases a house. It was before the time of Uber or even widespread use of cell phones, and with no cabs passing by, I had little hope of getting one. Public transit existed, but it was both sparse and not running nearby. The stretches of Main between intersections were long, and I'd probably be spotted on them anyway since the guy was circling. Being 15 minutes away from both Roxy's and my home, there was also no way I could get anywhere near either place before the green car came back around again. I quickly thumbed through my mental Rolodex of true crime show-inspired safety tips that should have kept me out of this situation in the first place. Tip number 1, get to an open business, inform the clerk, have them call the police, and stay put. Then the guy would either give up or get caught. I was coming up on a convenience store on the opposite side of the street, where I'd bought a pack of cigarettes earlier in the night, but as I got closer, the desolate blackness through the windows told me that it was closed. I looked around for something else, another bar, a gas station, anything, but the street was flanked by shuttered brick buildings and a locked-up church. Then came the headlights in green again. Again, the guy slowed down as he approached me, but his demeanor had shifted once more. He put his palm out impatiently, as if he couldn't understand my lack of complicity. "Come on," the guy yelled through his now open window, his face an equal picture of aggression, intimidation, and frustration. I kept out of arm's reach on the sidewalk, and once again ignored him, but this time, I was properly shaken. He angrily punched the gas, and was off on his familiar circuit back around towards me. Now I knew I was in trouble. The guy's behavior was escalating, and I was genuinely scared that his next move would be to grab me off the sidewalk and pull me into his car. From there, God only knew what sort of depravity I was in for. I scrambled through my memory for another safety tip, and I remembered that making myself both impossible to ignore and obviously in distress could get me some much-needed attention from an outside party. I ran into the middle of Main Street and started frantically waving my hands and shouting at every car that was coming my way. The first car drove right by. The second car, same result. The terror in me was palpable. I knew the stories of city dwellers like Kitty Genovese, who were left to their horrible fates at the hands of monsters by jaded throngs of people who heard the attacks perpetrated on them and their cries for help, yet did nothing out of both an assumption that someone else would step up and a reluctance to get involved. Would I be the next victim of the bystander effect, snatched away to an early end because of big city indifference? As I was beginning to lose hope, but still determined to keep trying while thinking of my next bold move, a van pulled over that had 4 young black men in it. As a white woman, I was relieved. I knew that statistically, male predators overwhelmingly tend to prey on women of their same race. In a game of numbers, this van full of guys was exponentially safer than that single stalker in the green car. I opted to take the gamble. I frantically told them about the man in the green car who kept circling around the block and following me, and begged for a ride home. The driver asked if I had any money in exchange for the favor. I didn't. Then he asked if I had any cigarettes. I may be one of the only people you'll ever meet who actually had her life saved by smokes. Though I had never been a smoker before, I briefly picked up the filthy habit because New York State bars still allowed smoking, and it was a weird part of Buffalo lesbian bar culture that I emulated to fit in. "Yes," I answered urgently. "I just bought a pack and you can have the whole thing if you get me home." Admittedly, I was initially a little miffed that the driver wanted something from me in exchange for not letting me get abducted off the street, as well as the implication that he may not have helped me if I had nothing. But still, I had the Marlboros, he had a vehicle, and the stars had hopefully aligned. Regardless of how it went down, I had help if he let me in, and the details didn't matter. After a second or two of thought, which seemed like an eternity to me, the driver agreed and one of the 2 dudes in the back opened the side door for me and got out so I could slide into the seat behind the driver. As the door to my safe carriage full of impromptu nights shut, and I buckled myself in, I looked out my window just in time to see the green car creeping past the van and proving to my saviors that I was telling a very disturbing true story. Until my dying day, I will never forget that man's eyes. Feeling safe surrounded by a closed van full of young, tough-looking rescuers, I looked that bastard dead in his eyes. Part of me was rightfully terrified, but another part of me wanted to look right at him defiantly and tell him with my eyes, "I got away from you. I win." I was repaid with the most evil, hateful look that I've ever had directed at me, let alone seen. His eyes were black like a cat's eyes get when it sees a bug in the house and its hunting instincts turn on. But at least there's usually a hint of playful mischief in a hunting cat's eyes. The eyes I was seeing were those of a pure, unadulterated predator, and the vitriol that practically oozed from them as he glared at me to let me know exactly how he felt about having his prey having the audacity to elude him. He drove off into the night, and so did we, in a bit less direct of a route to make sure that we lost him. After a blessedly quick jaunt, with frequent looks behind my shoulder, I was delivered home, 1 pack of cigarettes short, but alive and in one piece. The first thing that I did when I got in the door was to check that the locks on absolutely everything were engaged. After that, the adrenaline started to wear off, and the fear set in. I was so terrified that the man in the green sedan was searching the area where I got dropped off that I grabbed the cordless phone, then lay completely flat on the living room floor for hours to keep totally out of sight from any of my apartment windows. As I lay there, I called the Buffalo police and relayed my terrifying tale in as much detail as I could give them. Being painfully aware of the prevalence of hate crimes against the LGBT community, I told the cops that it was possible that the man was cruising near Roxy's to prey on vulnerable queer women In hindsight, though, I think the guy just saw who he thought was an easy mark out by herself and availed himself of the opportunity to strike. Fast forward another 4 years, and I'd moved out to Chicago to live with my then girlfriend. For about half of my 4 years there, I was pretty homesick. I'd never lived anywhere except my home state of New York, and I went there knowing no one except for my ex, who wasn't exactly an empathetic soul, adding to my feelings of isolation. I coped by keeping up on upstate New York news, so I'd feel a little less far away. On a chilly mid-January morning in 2007, I was at our computer looking up headlines from my home state when one from WBFO popped up that immediately snared my attention. Bike path rapist is arrested. By then, I knew the moniker well. The internet had since aged into a beautifully organized repository of knowledge, and despite the lack of transparency from my alma mater, I became familiar with the Buffalo area mystery man and his active status throughout my time in Buffalo. Now I had a name for the specter responsible for that bit of eeriness that was always in the back of my mind when I was a student. The bike path rapist was revealed as Artemio Sanchez, a middle-aged native of Puerto Rico who coached his son's sports teams and was affectionately referred to as Uncle Al in his neighborhood. As with many other killers, his disguises were his community involvement and just being ordinary. The man was estimated to have been responsible for 9 to 15 assaults around the Buffalo area since 1975 and had confessed to 3 murders: the Yalem murder in 1991, a second in 1992, and a third which had occurred only 3.5 months prior to his capture. I don't know if you've ever felt your heart somehow get wedged up into your voice box and get dropped into the depths of your stomach simultaneously, but believe me when I say that it's possible, given the right catalyst. For me, that was the printed proof that the man was active while I lived in Buffalo and frequented Roxy's. More so, I knew that serial killers rarely take breaks as lengthy as the one between his 1992 and 2006 killings. He had to have been at least attempting to sate his evil impulses for those 14 years. That realization gave me a very bad feeling that I'd crossed paths with someone much more dangerous than I had realized. The news article had no picture of Sanchez, but the sickening feeling inside me urged me to find one. It was almost as if I knew what I would see before I even looked at him. I searched his name, and I was horrified, though not surprised, to see those same black, soulless, predatory eyes that I looked into 4 times on that summer night in Buffalo back in 2003. The timeline fit. My profile as a victim fit if he did, in fact, mistake me for a downtown prostitute, and barring all else, I knew those eyes. I had a potentially deadly close encounter with Artemio Sanchez, the bike path rapist, aka the bike path killer. My lack of sense put me in his orbit, and a van of angels pulled me out of it. I know who I saw, and as God is my witness, I will never be convinced otherwise. Though many of his acts fell victim to various statutes of limitation, Artemio Sanchez pled guilty to the 3 murders and was sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. In essence, the guy won't be exposed to the outside again unless he's in a body bag. So, Artemio, even if you're worm food and being wheeled out in a bag on a prison gurney, I'll take that encounter that we had many years ago and be thankful that I never had the opportunity to meet you.